By the way, is black messing this up? Because I
Is
see
equal now?
Yeah, I see that white definitely
Wait.
improved.
What happened? We got this.
Okay, wow.
Oh, King
Wow, what
H7.
is flip? What is flip? Is white winning even?
Yes, look at the
Wow.
eval bar.
That's crazy. Hello, dear friends. It's black to play in this position. I want you to find a good plan for black. While I set the context, please look at the position and formulate a strong plan for black by looking at a weak square on the board. Namely, the f4 outpost. That's my final prompt for you. And I will start setting the context. This weekend, I was commentating on Norwegian Championship for women and girls. Solveig Friberg, educator and chessable author, streamed the entire tournament. That was the first time ever this championship for women and girls was live broadcasted. So kudos to Solveig for this huge achievement and contribution to women chess. Thank you so much, Solveig, for also inviting me to this round 4 where we were commentating in English. There were several interesting games in this round, but this one to me was the most instructive. I will divide this video into 2 segments. The first segment will show how black is beautifully maneuvering her pieces to beautiful squares and outplaying white strategically, and then spoiling all the advantage by missing a resource for the opponent. Chess is such a cruel game. You can play the best game in your life and you can spoil all the advantage with a single mistake. The players are Niina Koskela versus Monika Machlik. Both of these players are above 2100 elo. While I'm showing you the moves and while you see black's advantages growing move by move from here, I also want you to think about this question of how do I ever lose this game? I think it was first Jacob Aagaard who mentioned this in one of his podcasts. You can ask yourself so many good questions in chess, right? One of the good questions could be, how do I ever lose this position? An interesting one, right? It sort of prompts us to be vigilant about the hidden dangers. It forces us to look at the opponent's resources. Even though it looks like a position that is full domination from our side, it is still a useful question to spot potential swindles or hidden resources for the opponent. So while I'm showing you the moves right now, I also want you to ask yourself this question for black at a later stage. All right, let's begin. This square on f4, folks, is an outpost. And the knights, of course, would love to use such outpost squares in chess. And here, black finds a beautiful plan to ultimately plant the knight on f4. Can you guess it? Yes, folks. She plays the move knight h7. Couple of ideas, right? Knight f8, move the bishop, knight e6 to f4. Sometimes knight f8, knight g6 to f4. Knight is heading towards the ideal destination of f4. You see, the pawn structure is allowing black to implant an eternal knight on f4. If you look at this position, folks, optically, it looks like white has 2 knights, and optically, it looks like a closed position. So you might tell yourself, hey, knights love closed positions, so white must be better. In fact, there is no similar outpost square for white in this position, right? The pawn structure is very intact, and the black pawns are taken away, all the good squares from the white knights. Yes, there's a knight on f5 that looks very strong, but I will never take your knight with my bishop because then your bishop will activate on g2. I will never let your king's Indian bishop to activate, so I will play around your knight. Sometimes there's even options for black to play g6 and chase away that knight. That is not an outpost for white, right? f5 is not an outpost because black can play g6 at some point. But f4 is a clear outpost. From here, Monika Machlik starts outplaying the opponent. Knight g3, black goes g6, and they dominate both of these knights, my friends. And now this is still the outpost, and she's slowly maneuvering her pieces. Outplaying starts from this position. Also, the advantage is very long-term for black, right? White has no natural pawn break, no dynamical means to change the natural course of the game. Also, black is the bishop pair. Both of them are actually good bishops, right? This can go to c5 later on, and so on and so on. The bishop is terrible on g2. The knight doesn't do much. Also, this knight doesn't do much. And this knight has a potential in this position, right? Outplaying continues. Knight f8, slowly moving the bishop and then moving the knight over there. But she waits. She's flexible. She sometimes eyes also these little squares, little targets. She's not in a hurry. You see, black doesn't hurry. Why should she? Because white is totally tied down in its position. They have no dynamical means. Look at this. Bishop c4 comes at a tempo on the queen. Thus, she's preparing this little e6 square for the knight for the ultimate journey towards f4. Also notice this, my friends. This knight on g2 is a terrible piece. Fianchetto knights in chess are terrible. It's even worse because they are tied down in stopping black's ideas of knight f4. You see how black outplayed white from that initial position? The pawn seems to be attacked. She played king g7, which is also, of course, a fine move. But black could just ignore it and play the move knight e6. Why? Because if you take my pawn, bam, bishop g5, and the queen is trapped, right? So black could have gone knight e6 directly because this is not a real threat. In any case, she plays king g7. Everything is still in black's favor. Bishop b2, black takes, and then goes knight e6. Clarifies the situation. Please compare this knight with this knight. Beautiful position for black. Also, the bishop is very active. It can go to c5 and so on. Open file is also in black's hands. See how black is playing positionally in this segment. Sometimes these ideas are there, sometimes attacking the pawn on e4. She's just, enjoying her position for the moment. White goes knight f3, knight d3. Well, black enjoys the position for the moment. No knight trade. The knight finally goes to this beautiful destination on f4, and black's advantage intensified. Please look at every single black piece, folks. They are much better than their white counterparts. See how she got this position from the initial position. Beautiful positional play so far from black. f6 defends the pawn so you don't tie down your queen on that pawn on e5, because the queen wants to go here and establish herself on this open file. Every single black piece, folks, is better. Black is winning. It's already a winning positional advantage. And it's easy to understand why, right? Please compare the white pieces with their black counterparts, my friends. That is the story of this game. But chess is such a cruel game. While making all these moves, they are both running short of time. Of course, they have half a minute increment after every move, but already here, black is down around a minute. And that's also, of course, a danger of playing such positions, because at some point you can make a big mistake in time pressure. Here, black is still going back to f4. And after rook d1, black transforms the position by taking on e3, right? By taking on e3, you're hitting the rook twice. Thus, they need to take the rook first. You take back, and you just gave them doubled pawns in this position, okay? Knight e6 is fine. Knight e6, black's advantage is still there because of better pieces, right? Both the knight and the queen are better than the white counterparts. And again, black hits those little targets and forces a concession. a3 is a big mistake as well because it allows queen a2, very strong move. Well, that's the first target. That's the second target. And this knight has to move for the queen to defend b2. But if the knight moves, then you're winning the pawn on e4. You see? By hitting those two targets, black is winning a pawn by force in this position. Knight takes e4. Knight g3, knight d6. Queen d2 hits a knight, but she finds a beautiful move, queen d5. The queen is back to the center. If you ever take my queen, then this is a completely lost position for white because of knight c4 coming. Extra pawn, one more pawn will be gobbled. So the queen has to go to e2. Again, please take a stock, my friends. Black is completely winning position for black. But I want you to ask yourself that question I told you. How do I ever lose this position? That's a beautiful question for black right now, to be aware of hidden dangers in the position. Okay? Ask yourself this question by observing this knight on g3 as a terrible piece because of the pawn on g6. That's my prompt for you right now, right? That pawn is dominating that knight on g3. So, ask yourself this key question. Is there a way for white ever to awaken their knight on g3, right? I want you to ask yourself this question and please tell me the plan for white that establishes that. Yes, folks, you're a great player if you understood the only way for white to fight in this position is to go h4, h5 to be able to undermine that square for their knight. That will be an awakening operation, undermining operation to awaken that terrible piece. Yes, the knight is terrible because of the pawn on g6, but the pawn on g6 is lacking support. Thus, the pawn on g6 can be attacked by the pawn on h5. Positional patterns for you. Very, very important positional pattern to know. If black asks herself this question right now, I think she could have been more vigilant about what's coming later on, because that's the only source of counterplay for white. Again, having said all this, it will probably never happen. Look at the knight on f1, they are going back to defense, but care is always a good thing in chess. e4 is beautiful, she's playing amazing chess. Knight e5 to f3 is an idea. She's stopping e4 from white. She's introducing ideas like queen d3. Black is completely winning in this position. King g1, queen d3, beautiful, beautiful, and then knight e5. Of course, knight e5 stops queen c7, but also introduces this fork on f3. You see how black is playing so far? Amazing chess. Almost every single move is nice, and she got herself almost like -5 advantage. Winning advantage, 1 minute and 30 seconds left on both sides clock, more or less, in this position. Okay? And here, folks, black starts to go wrong in this position. It's a regrettable segment for black, I think, that things start to go wrong for black in this position. Maybe you can stop the video right now, come up with a good winning plan for black. How would you win this position? I gave this position to my students yesterday in my group session in a simultaneous exhibition. I led them to crush me from this position with the black pieces, and 3 of them crushed me with black. But of course, they had 15 minutes on their clock plus 1 minute increment per each move. They had ample time to crush me with black. Easier said than done. The hardest thing in chess, as they say, is to convert a winning advantage. We cannot blame her too much. But how would you play in this position? Folks, I think a couple of good ideas are there for black. First thing is simple move queen b1 with the idea of knight d3 followed by gobbling up the pawn on b2. This also pins the knight on f1, right? Doesn't give any counterplay to black. If you play queen f4, there is still no danger because I can always take your pawn. The queen cannot enter c7. If you take here, then I can even take one of these pawns, probably a3 or c3, and black is still completely winning in this position. Okay, maybe that's the simplest, to go queen b1 followed by knight d3 if white does nothing. For example, king g3, knight d3, and the pawn is dropping by force, right? Because if queen g3 to gain some counterplay, I can take this with check. And that's the key difference, right? That's the key difference. I can always go back to e5 and stop you from going to c7. That's how 2 students crush me. They play like this and they won very simply against me because white has no counterplay whatsoever in this position. And more pawns are dropping on the queen side. Okay? But also because of short of time, she started with the move knight f3 check in this position, probably to gain some time on her clock. And then here she plays the move queen d6, which is a little bit strange because it doesn't even create a threat of queen h2, correct? And she allowed the move knight g3, my friends. And suddenly the knight is hitting the pawn on e4. You can't even play f5 because they will take on f5. Suddenly black needs to defend some of her stuff. Again, with best play, black is winning, but here she starts to go wrong. She plays knight e2. That knight had so much potential on e5. Right now the task is to simply guard the pawn on e4. Even the queen is tied down in guarding the knight on d2, right? You can see things are starting to go wrong, and now comes my question. White to play. It's a great resourcefulness exercise. White is of course still lost, but white will find a good plan. Try to change the picture in this position. And you're a great player, folks, if you found the entire plan of h4, h5 to awaken that terrible knight on g3. You see, that's how swindles happen in chess. She introduced this little idea of h4, h5, which is actually very difficult to stop for black, right? How are you going to stop white from playing h5 and then undermining that square for their knight? white is forming a plan, and from here the game is swinging to white side. One blunder follows, king h7, h5 is great, another blunder follows with knight c4. They take on g6. They should have taken back with the king because it's not mate, but still, you see, right? Every single piece is now coming to the tray. Black has to be so careful in this position to be able to hold this position, right? With best play, black is surviving, but you see, all this counterplay was given to white in this position. So after h takes g6, she doesn't even take the pawn on g6. She plays king g8, my friends, but then, you know, things are collapsing. Knight takes e4 is coming. If white played the move king h3, white is completely winning. Also a difficult move to find, by the way. The point is queen d2s won't trade the queens, and white is going for an attack by keeping the queens on the board, okay? And here actually white is completely winning, but she played the move knight takes e4. Objectively, the game is still equal, but one more pawn is gone. Check is coming. You cannot take the pawn on g6 because of the fork on f4. Well, you have to drop back the king. With best play, black is surviving, but white, of course, keeps the game going because she understands that black is confabulated in this position. Queen d5, another blunder follows, my friends, because after e4, she probably doesn't see that queen d2 is not an option because that will only lead to a queen trade. That's exactly how the game went. In the resulting position, white has two extra pawns, and both of these pawns are passed pawns. You cannot deal with them with your king and your knight. Unfortunately, white is completely winning in its position. She tries to stop the pawn that way. King e4 is also winning, but she also finds a good move g5, followed by king g4. She will gobble up one more pawn, and she will establish this easily winning two extra pawn position with a much more active king. The game is completely finished, my friends. She goes knight e8 check, followed by knight e6. That pawn is also dropping, and the game is ending in a very cute way. White finds a good tactic, divergent tactic, knight c7, a beautiful knight sacrifice to be able to roll the pawn. Now the knight is helpless in stopping the pawn. Knight e8, it's very important. This comes with check. Otherwise, knight f6 fork would pick up the queen. But since this move comes with check, white is winning this position. An incredible swindle, right? Given how the entire game went so far, black played beautiful chess, won a clear pawn, still dominating pieces on the center of the board. Weak pawn on e3, terrible, yeah, as we say. Black has a pawn plus too much compensation. -5 according to Stockfish. She plays beautiful chess, knight e5, all these ideas are coming, and suddenly, right, couple of mistakes like this, couple of like aimless moves, and you feel some pressure on the pawn on e4, and you get confabulated. You lose the track. You lose the track of the position. Suddenly, h4, h5 is coming. Also, look at the resourcefulness from the white side, right? We should also congratulate her for not giving up and finding all these hidden resources. h4, h5 is indeed a very annoying threat. The best is probably queen d5 in this position. Well, white will go h5 anyway, and then you will play the move knight f3 to at least close up the queen's axis. Well, they can take on g6. After you take, the knight can still jump to f5 in this position, but in fact, this knight is not dangerous. Black is still winning after moves like queen d2, for example, yeah, forcing a queen trade, and then knight c4s are coming, and you will gobble up the pawn, and you will win the game that way. But still, it looks like you just created a beautiful knight on f5 for no reason. You see, she was also probably completely shocked because for the entire game, the knight was terrible, the queen was terrible, like zero counterplay was given to the opponent. Suddenly, there is some counterplay, there are some little threats, and you're down on the clock. You only have 1 minute left for these decisions. That's why chess is such a cruel game, my friends, right? It's just, there's so much dimensions in the game to be able to win a winning position. And once you see this annoying threat like this, in time trouble, I can imagine it will be very difficult for many players to handle these positions accurately. So if black understood these little moves, this little plan of h4, h5 and knight g3, perhaps she could have been more careful in this position to not to allow all these moves. Yeah, maybe queen b1 then will be maybe easier to spot from afar. Just pinning the knight, introducing ideas like this. Also, this shows us, you know, the knight has so much potential on e5. That's a great piece. Why do you commit by going to f3 in this position? Sometimes the knight can go to d3, as we saw in this line, right? To attack the pawn on b2. Sometimes the knight can go to c4. Sometimes the best is to keep it on e5 just to stop all these ideas from white, right? It also, I think, is a very instructive example that sometimes we just have to be very flexible with our beautiful pieces and don't commit that easily. But having said all this, black player Monika Machlik should also be happy from the overall game performance, because here she totally outplayed the opponent. Even from the opening stage, she actually played very good chess by expanding on the queen side, by not giving any good squares for the white knights, by playing around the knight on f5 and never taking that piece, thus awakening that terrible bishop. She played beautiful positional chess. And even here, right, we see the point of this f4 outpost and how you form a plan in chess. She's forming a very strong plan while also dominating those knights for white. This game teaches us that not all close positions favor knights, because the position is closed, white has two knights and they suffered for the entire game. On the contrary, knights love broken structures. Knights love weakened structures where they gain such stable squares in the center of the board, right? Or close to the enemy territory, like on f4. And once you spot those targets, those weaknesses, you form a plan accordingly, right? Just look how the plan is emerging given those targets in the position. So my point, Monika, is that you should not be too harsh on yourself. You played a beautiful positional chess for most of this game, and yet in time trouble you spoiled the advantage. I've been there myself. I lost so many winning positions in my chess life by outplaying people positionally only to miscalculate something or misjudge something and panicking after a mistake and a second blunder followed. I lost so many games against stronger players like grandmasters, international masters in this very same way. So I totally hear your, let's say, sadness in this game. And you will tell me whether Jacob Aagaard's question of how do I ever lose this game would help black in, let's say, being more vigilant about white's plan, right? Because that theory goes like this. If you really ask yourself this question at the right time, then at least if these moves start coming to you, you don't get shocked. Yeah, because maybe Monika was completely shocked in the actual game when she saw h4, h5 and this little idea with knight f5. So maybe by asking those questions at the right time, we can also preempt certain ideas that look dangerous, that could make things swing if things go wrong, and yet we become prepared by asking those questions at the right time, right? We handle them properly if they ever happen on the board. What are your observations about this game? What are your lessons that you took from this game? How would you play a position like this? How would you win this position? Did my plan make sense to you? Or you saw something that is even more interesting and maybe perhaps stronger for black to convert such an advantage? Please let me know on the comments and we discuss and we become better players accordingly. And finally, thank you so much, Solveig Friberg, for inviting me to your stream and to share those ideas with your audience. It was a very instructive stream. I learned a lot and hopefully community also learned a lot. We broke down the concepts to their core. We kept asking those why questions to make chess learning much more instructive and efficient. Wishing you all the best, my friends and the community. And thank you again, Solveig, for your contribution to women chess. Bye-bye.